The world doesn't reveal a person's character when they have nothing. It reveals it when no one is watching. The first thing I noticed wasn't the money. It was the silence around it. $50,000 sat inside a thick ivory envelope on a polished oak table in the center of Bellucci's Steakhouse, one of the most expensive restaurants in Manhattan. The dinner crowd had already returned to their conversations. Silverware clinked softly against porcelain. Crystal glasses reflected the warm glow of antique chandeliers, and a jazz pianist played somewhere near the bar. Yet no one dared move within 10 feet of that table. Everyone knew who had been sitting there moments earlier. Vincent Moretti didn't need introductions. His tailored charcoal suit, calm expression, and quiet confidence carried more authority than raised voices ever could. He had finished his meal, stood without looking back, exchanged a few words with his associates, and walked out into the rainy Manhattan evening, leaving the envelope behind as if $50,000 weighed no more than yesterday's newspaper. Nobody called after him. Nobody reached for the cash. Even the waiters avoided the table, pretending another customer would eventually claim it. Fear has a strange way of making people invisible. I watched everything from the restaurant's front window where I sold flowers every Friday night. My name is Lily Parker. I was 8 years old, and every bouquet I carried felt heavier than it looked because every dollar I earned helped my mom pay rent. Rain tapped softly against the glass while cold wind slipped beneath my faded blue jacket. Most people walked past without making eye contact. Some smiled politely. Others acted as though a little girl holding daisies simply blended into the sidewalk. I was used to that. Mom always told me not to feel sorry for ourselves. She said kindness was something rich and poor people could both afford. I believed her. Then I noticed the envelope still sitting alone. Customers glanced at it before quickly looking away. A businessman slowed his pace, hesitated for 2 seconds, then hurried toward the exit. Even the hostess refused to touch it. I stepped inside, shaking tiny drops of rain from my sneakers. The restaurant suddenly felt much warmer than the street, carrying the smell of fresh bread, grilled steak, and expensive perfume. Nobody stopped me. Maybe because children rarely look dangerous. Maybe because nobody imagined someone like me would walk toward $50,000 without a second thought. I climbed onto my toes just enough to reach the tabletop. The envelope felt surprisingly heavy in my hands. I didn't peek inside. I didn't count anything. Mom had taught me something long before I learned multiplication. If it doesn't belong to you, neither does the choice to open it. Through the rain-speckled front windows, I caught sight of a line of black SUVs waiting beneath the glowing streetlights. Men in dark suits stood beside them, scanning the sidewalk with quiet discipline. Vincent Moretti was already opening the rear passenger door. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear the piano anymore. Before my courage had the chance to disappear, I hugged the envelope against my chest, pushed through the restaurant doors, and ran into the cold Manhattan rain, chasing the only man in the city who could lose $50,000 without ever looking back. I splashed through puddles that soaked my sneakers within seconds, clutching the envelope so tightly my fingers began to ache. The line of black sport utility vehicles looked even larger outside, their glossy paint reflecting the city lights like dark mirrors beneath the steady rain. Men in tailored black coats stood beside each vehicle with calm expressions, their attention fixed on everything happening around them. None of them smiled. None of them looked distracted. I was only a few yards away when one of them stepped forward and raised a hand. "Stop right there, sweetheart," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. My feet froze on the wet sidewalk. My heart pounded against my ribs so hard I wondered if everyone could hear it. Before I could say a single word, the rear passenger door that Vincent Moretti had been about to enter remained open. He slowly turned toward us. Even from across the sidewalk, there was something different about him. He did not rush. He did not raise his voice. He simply looked at me with calm gray eyes that seemed to notice every tiny detail, from the rain dripping off my hair to the bouquet of white daisies hanging from my wrist. "Let her come," he said quietly. The men immediately stepped aside without another word. I swallowed hard and walked the last few steps until I stood in front of him. He was much taller than I expected, yet somehow he did not feel frightening anymore. He looked curious. I lifted the envelope with both hands. "Mister, I think you forgot this." For a long second he did not reach for it. His eyes shifted from the envelope to my face, then back again, almost as though he could not understand what he was seeing. Finally, he accepted it carefully. The rain continued falling around us while the city hurried by, without noticing that something unusual had just happened on an ordinary Friday night. "Did you open it?" he asked. I shook my head. "No, sir." "Did you know what was inside?" I nodded once. People in the restaurant were whispering about it. One corner of his mouth lifted ever so slightly. "And you still brought it back. It is yours." His gaze remained fixed on me. "Do you know how many people would have kept it?" I looked down at my soaked sneakers before answering. "Maybe a lot." "Then why did you not?" I remembered my mother folding laundry in our tiny apartment only 2 nights earlier. She had smiled, even though the electricity had been shut off for an hour because we had fallen behind on the bill. She always found a way to smile. My mom says money can solve problems, but taking someone else's money only creates bigger ones. The words settled into the rainy silence between us. None of the men surrounding Vincent spoke. One of them quietly looked away, almost embarrassed. Vincent glanced at the envelope in his hand before slipping it inside his coat. Then he reached into his jacket again and removed a thick leather wallet. He pulled out several crisp $100 bills and extended them toward me. "You earned this." I stared at the money, more cash than I had ever seen held by one person. For a brief moment, I imagined groceries. Filling our refrigerator, my mother's medicine, the rent notice taped to our apartment door disappearing forever. The thought lasted only a heartbeat. I slowly stepped backward and folded my hands behind my back. "Thank you, sir," I whispered. "But my mom says honesty is not something you sell." For the first time since I had met him, Vincent Moretti stood completely speechless while the rain continued to fall around us. I expected him to leave without another word. Men like Vincent Moretti probably had meetings to attend, important people waiting, entire schedules built around minutes that mattered more than mine ever would. Instead, he remained standing in the rain, studying me with an expression that was impossible to read. It was not suspicion. It was not amusement. It looked more like someone trying to solve a puzzle that refused to make sense. "What is your name?" he finally asked. "Lily Parker, sir." "How old are you, Lily?" 8. He nodded slowly, as though committing the answer to memory. "And where are your parents?" I smiled a little before looking down at the bouquet still hanging from my wrist. "Just my mom." Something softened in his face, almost too quickly to notice. "She lets you sell flowers alone?" "She does not like it, but she works evenings at the bakery." I stay close to the restaurant because there are lights and lots of people. One of the men beside Vincent quietly checked his watch, but Vincent did not move. He looked past me toward the restaurant entrance where customers continued coming and going beneath oversized umbrellas. "How many flowers did you sell tonight?" I counted silently. 5 bouquets. "Is that enough?" I shrugged. "Sometimes yes. Sometimes no. Today is almost enough." He understood what I meant without asking another question. Almost enough meant groceries, but not medicine. Rent, but not electricity. Hope that stretched only until tomorrow morning. He reached into his coat once more, and for an instant I worried he would offer money again. Instead, he pulled out a simple white business card. There was only a name, a phone number, and nothing else printed on it. No company, no title, just Vincent Moretti. He held it toward me. "If your mother ever needs help, she may call this number." I did not take it immediately. Mom always warned me not to accept things from strangers, even polite strangers. Vincent seemed to notice my hesitation. "You do not have to call," he said calmly. "Keep it only if it makes you feel safer." I carefully accepted the card with both hands and slipped it inside the little pocket sewn into my jacket. "Thank you, sir." His eyes drifted to the flowers. "Those are beautiful." I looked at the daisies and smiled for the first time that evening. My mom says flowers remind people that tomorrow is worth waiting for. Vincent looked away toward the rain-covered skyline. Something about those words lingered in the silence between us. Then his phone vibrated softly. One of the men stepped closer and whispered something I could not hear. Vincent answered with a slight nod before looking back at me one last time. "You should head home before the rain gets worse." "Yes, sir." I turned and started walking toward the subway entrance, careful not to step into the deeper puddles. Halfway across the corner, curiosity made me glance back over my shoulder. The line of black sport utility vehicles had not moved. Vincent was still standing exactly where I had left him. He was watching me instead of getting into his vehicle. It felt strange, almost unreal. I lifted one hand in a small wave before disappearing into the crowd. He did not wave back, but I noticed the faintest smile as the car door finally closed behind him. Inside the warmth of the vehicle, Vincent rested the envelope on his lap without opening it. "Find out everything about Lily Parker," he said quietly. None of the men questioned the request. The driver simply started the engine as another passenger opened a tablet. "Everything, sir?" the man asked. Vincent kept his eyes on the rain sliding across the window. "Everything. A child who refuses $50,000 is carrying a story that money cannot explain. I want to know that story." The next morning began like every other Saturday in our apartment on West 147th Street. The old radiator clicked even though it barely produced any heat. The kitchen faucet dripped into a cracked coffee mug, and the smell of fresh bread clinging to my mother's sweater filled our tiny living room long before sunrise. Emma Parker had worked the overnight shift at the neighborhood bakery again. Flour dust still covered one sleeve of her faded uniform as she quietly counted a handful of dollar bills across the kitchen table. I pretended to color at the other end of the room because I knew she smiled more when she thought I was not paying attention. She separated the money into little piles. Rent, groceries, bus fare, medicine. The last pile stayed painfully small. She sighed, then slid 2 bills from groceries into medicine before noticing me watching. Her tired smile returned almost instantly. "Good morning, sweetheart." "Good morning, Mom." She walked over and kissed the top of my head. Her hand smelled like warm bread and cinnamon. "Did you have a good night selling flowers?" I nodded happily. "I sold 5 bouquets." 5. Her eyes brightened. "That is wonderful." I almost told her everything. The restaurant. The envelope. The man whose name was written on the white card tucked safely inside my jacket pocket. But something stopped me. Not because I wanted to hide it from her. Because I wanted to understand it first. She poured the last of the milk into my cereal bowl instead of her coffee. She always claimed she liked black coffee better, but I knew the truth. There simply was not enough milk for both of us. After breakfast, she opened the medicine bottle and shook it gently. Only 2 pills rolled into her hand. She looked at them for several seconds before placing one back inside. "Mom," I asked softly, "did the doctor say you have to take them every day?" She smiled again, but this one looked heavier. "Doctors worry too much." I knew that answer meant yes. Around the same time, several miles downtown, Vincent Moretti sat alone inside a quiet office overlooking the Hudson River. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the cloudy skyline, while a fresh cup of espresso cooled untouched beside him. The only sound came from a folder being placed carefully onto his desk. Everything we found on the Parker family, his longtime advisor said. Vincent opened it without speaking. There was no criminal history, no hidden fortune, no lawsuits, only employment records, school attendance, unpaid utility notices, medical bills, and a rental account that was nearly 3 months behind. He stopped on a photograph taken outside a small neighborhood bakery. Emma stood beside Lily, both laughing over a crooked birthday cake with 8 candles. The picture had clearly been taken by someone passing on the sidewalk because neither of them was looking at the camera. They looked happy. Vincent frowned slightly. He had seen families with far more money who smiled far less. "The mother works 2 jobs, his advisor continued. "She has declined financial assistance twice from local charities." Vincent looked up. "Why?" "According to the volunteers, she said another family probably needed it more." Silence settled across the office. Vincent slowly closed the folder, resting one hand on the cover. He had expected to uncover deception, hidden accounts, clever manipulation, some explanation for an 8-year-old refusing enough money to change her life overnight. Instead, he found something much rarer, dignity that had survived hardship. As rain began tapping softly against the windows again, Vincent turned toward the skyline and quietly asked the question that refused to leave his mind. How does a child learn honesty this deep? Unless someone extraordinary teaches it every single day. Monday arrived with clear skies, but our luck did not. I walked beside my mother carrying a fresh bucket of daisies while she balanced 2 paper bags filled with day-old bread the bakery owner had allowed her to take home. We laughed over how one loaf had somehow come out shaped like a heart, and for a few precious minutes life almost felt ordinary. Then we reached our apartment building. Mr. Collins, the landlord, stood waiting on the front steps with a clipboard tucked beneath one arm. He was usually polite, but that morning his smile never appeared. "Emma," he called gently. My mother stopped walking. I immediately felt her fingers tighten around mine. Can we talk for a minute? She asked me softly. Wait by the mailbox, sweetheart. I nodded, even though I already knew what the conversation was about. Adults always lowered their voices when they discussed money, as though children could not understand the silence afterward. I watched from a few feet away while Mr. Collins removed several papers from his clipboard. He was not angry. If anything, he looked uncomfortable. My mother listened quietly, occasionally nodding without interrupting him. When she finally spoke, her voice stayed calm. I only need 2 more weeks. He rubbed the back of his neck. I have already given you 2 extra months, Emma. The building owner is asking questions. She looked down for a moment before answering. I understand. There was no argument. No raised voices. Just 2 tired people trapped by circumstances neither of them seemed to like. Mr. Collins handed her an envelope and sighed. I truly hope you find a solution. After he walked away, my mother folded the paper without opening it. She smiled when she noticed me watching, but her eyes looked shinier than usual. Everything is fine, she said. I had heard those words enough times to know they usually meant the opposite. That afternoon I sold flowers outside the same restaurant as always, but my thoughts kept drifting back to the envelope still hidden inside my mother's purse. Every bouquet I sold felt smaller somehow. Every dollar looked as though it disappeared before it reached my pocket. Across the street, a black luxury sedan rolled slowly past before stopping half a block away. Inside, Vincent Moretti sat quietly in the rear seat. He was not there for dinner. He was there because something inside him refused to forget a little girl who believed honesty mattered more than opportunity. He watched from behind lightly tinted windows as I offered flowers to strangers with the same bright smile I had worn 3 nights earlier. Some people bought bouquets. Others apologized because they had no cash. I thanked every single one of them exactly the same way. Vincent noticed everything. He noticed that I gave 1 daisy free to an elderly woman using a walker because she reminded me of my grandmother. He noticed that I helped a businessman gather papers after the wind knocked them from his briefcase. He noticed that I never complained when customers walked past without stopping. His phone vibrated. It was his advisor. We confirmed the notice, the man said. The Parkers have 14 days before they must leave the apartment if the balance is not paid. Vincent remained silent. Would you like us to settle the account anonymously? Another long pause followed. Vincent watched as I carefully tied a ribbon around the final bouquet in my bucket before handing it to a young couple celebrating their anniversary. They smiled. I smiled even wider. Only after the couple disappeared into the evening crowd did Vincent answer. Not yet. His advisor sounded surprised. Sir. Vincent kept his eyes fixed on the sidewalk. I do not want to rescue them before I understand them. There is a difference between solving a problem and changing a life. At that exact moment, I reached into my jacket to make sure the white business card was still there. My fingers found its smooth edges, and for reasons I could not explain, I suddenly felt as though someone was quietly watching over us, even if I could not yet see what tomorrow would bring. The next 2 days passed without anything changing on the surface, yet I could feel the weight inside our little apartment growing heavier. My mother still left before sunrise for the bakery and returned long after dark with tired feet and flour on her sleeves. She still smiled every time she looked at me, but now she spent longer staring at unopened bills after she thought I had fallen asleep. On Wednesday afternoon, I finished my homework early and decided to surprise her by selling flowers 1 extra hour before heading home. The sidewalk outside Bellucci's Steakhouse buzzed with office workers rushing toward the subway while tourists stopped to photograph the glowing skyline. I smiled at everyone, hoping to sell enough bouquets to buy my mother's favorite chamomile tea. Around 6 o'clock, a woman wearing a navy business suit stopped in front of me. She looked exhausted, her shoulders slumped as she searched through her purse. I only have a 20, she apologized. The bouquet is 10. I smiled and handed her the flowers anyway. That is okay. You can have your change. She blinked. Are you sure? Yes, ma'am. Flowers are supposed to make people smile. Her eyes grew watery before she thanked me and disappeared into the crowd. I never noticed the black sedan parked across the street. Vincent Moretti had witnessed the entire exchange through the rear window. His advisor sat beside him with another folder resting unopened on his lap. The eviction deadline is now 11 days away, he said quietly. Vincent did not answer. His attention remained fixed on the little girl who had just sacrificed half her profit to brighten a stranger's evening. Sir, his advisor continued carefully, you have delayed long enough. If you intend to help them, we should act before they lose their apartment. Vincent rested one hand against his chin. Tell me something. Of course. How many people have asked Emma Parker what she actually needs? The advisor hesitated. I do not know. Exactly. Vincent watched as I laughed with a little boy who insisted on smelling every flower before choosing one for his grandmother. Most people assume money is the answer because money is the only language they know. The advisor remained silent. Vincent finally turned toward him. Arrange a meeting with the owner of the bakery where Emma works. Are you buying the business? Vincent shook his head once. No. Then what would you like me to offer? A faint smile appeared on Vincent's face. Respect. Less than an hour later, while I walked home carrying only 2 unsold bouquets, Emma finished another shift at the bakery. She quietly removed her apron, expecting another ordinary evening. Instead, the owner called her into his office. Mr. Alvarez had always been kind, but tonight he looked unusually nervous. He invited her to sit down before sliding an envelope across the desk. Emma immediately pushed it back. I cannot accept charity. Mr. Alvarez smiled gently. It is not charity. She frowned in confusion. Then what is it? A customer visited this afternoon. He placed the largest catering order this bakery has received in almost 10 years. Emma blinked. That is wonderful. He requested one condition. Her smile faded. What condition? Mr. Alvarez looked directly into her eyes. He wants you to supervise the entire project, and he insisted that your salary be increased immediately because, in his words, the bakery's greatest asset deserves to be treated like one. Emma stared at the envelope again. Inside was not free money. It was an official promotion, a higher hourly wage, guaranteed overtime, and enough additional income to slowly catch up on every overdue bill. She whispered, almost to herself, why would someone do this? Mr. Alvarez slowly folded his hands across the desk. He never gave a reason. He only said that sometimes the best way to help a person is to make sure they never feel like they needed saving. Saturday morning arrived wrapped in golden sunlight instead of rain, and for the first time in weeks my mother hummed softly while making breakfast. It was a quiet little tune she used to sing before life became so heavy. The promotion at the bakery had not solved every problem overnight, but it had done something even more valuable. It had given her hope. Hope changed the way she walked. Hope changed the way she smiled. Hope even changed the taste of the scrambled eggs she somehow made from the last 3 eggs in our refrigerator. Someone was very kind this week, she said as she tied her apron strings. Maybe the world is reminding us not to give up. I smiled but said nothing about the white business card still tucked safely inside my jacket. I thought about it almost every day now. After breakfast, I carried my flour bucket back to the familiar sidewalk outside Bellucci's Steakhouse. The city felt brighter than usual. Children chased pigeons across the plaza while musicians filled the air with cheerful melodies from a nearby saxophone. Business was surprisingly good, and by early afternoon I had already sold more bouquets than I usually did in an entire evening. Then a familiar line of black sport utility vehicles quietly pulled to the curb. I recognized them immediately. The restaurant staff noticed them too. Conversations softened. Doors opened before anyone reached for the handles. Vincent Moretti stepped onto the sidewalk wearing another perfectly tailored suit, though this time without the rushed expression of someone heading toward an important meeting. He noticed me almost instantly. I smiled and waved before I even realized what I was doing. To my surprise, he walked directly toward me instead of entering the restaurant. Good afternoon, Lily. Good afternoon, Mr. Moretti. His eyes drifted toward my nearly empty flour bucket. Looks like business is good today. I nodded proudly. Almost sold out. He glanced around at the busy sidewalk before asking, have you eaten lunch? I blinked. It was not the question I expected. Not yet. Without another word, he looked toward the small food cart parked at the corner where an elderly husband and wife sold grilled cheese sandwiches every weekend. Would you join me? I hesitated for only a second before nodding. We walked together across the sidewalk, an unlikely pair that drew curious glances from nearly everyone we passed. Vincent ordered 2 grilled cheese sandwiches and 2 cups of tomato soup. When the owner tried to refuse payment because he recognized his customer, Vincent smiled politely and insisted on paying full price. We sat at a simple metal table beneath a striped umbrella instead of returning to the luxury restaurant only a few yards away. It felt strangely normal. I dipped my sandwich into the soup exactly the way my mother had taught me. Vincent watched for a moment before quietly doing the same. Better? I asked. He took another bite and nodded once. Much better. I laughed, and to my surprise, so did he. It was not loud. It was brief and genuine, almost as though he had forgotten how until that moment. Halfway through lunch, I noticed dark circles beneath his eyes. Mr. Moretti? Yes. Did you sleep? He looked at me with obvious confusion. Why do you ask? Because my mom says people who forget to rest eventually forget how to smile. He lowered his spoon very slowly. No business rival had ever asked him that question. No employee had ever dared. Most people wanted something from Vincent Moretti. Money, influence, protection. The little girl sitting across from him wanted to know whether he had eaten lunch and gotten enough sleep. For reasons he could not explain, that simple kindness settled somewhere deep inside him where years of wealth and power had never reached. As the afternoon sun warmed the sidewalk, Vincent realized something extraordinary had happened. He had come hoping to quietly improve one family's future, but without asking for anything in return, a little girl had already begun changing his. That evening I walked home carrying only one bouquet, the prettiest one with white daisies wrapped in pale blue paper. I had saved it for my mother because she always claimed flowers looked happier in our apartment than they did anywhere else. When I pushed open the old building door, I immediately heard laughter drifting down the hallway. Real laughter. Not the polite kind people forced when life became difficult. My mother stood outside our apartment talking with Mr. Collins. They both turned when they saw me. There she is, Mr. Collins said with a smile that reached his eyes this time. Your mother has some wonderful news. I looked up at Emma, who knelt and opened her arms before I ran straight into them. She hugged me so tightly I could hear her heartbeat. We are staying, sweetheart. I pulled back. Really? She nodded, tears shining in her eyes, but never falling. The promotion came with enough hours that I can catch up on the rent. Mr. Collins even worked out a payment plan that I can actually afford. Mr. Collins tipped his cap politely. Good people deserve a fair chance. After he left, I handed my mother the bouquet. She smiled as though I had given her diamonds instead of daisies. While she searched for our old glass vase, I noticed the folded white business card still resting on the kitchen counter where I had accidentally left it after emptying my jacket pocket. My mother picked it up, turned it over once, and frowned slightly. Who is Vincent Moretti? My stomach tightened. There was no point hiding the truth anymore. So I told her everything. The restaurant, the envelope, the money, the rain, the sandwiches, every word. She listened without interrupting, her expression changing from surprise to disbelief and finally to quiet understanding. When I finished, she looked at the business card for a long time before carefully placing it back on the table. You should have told me sooner. I lowered my eyes. I was afraid you would be upset. She gently lifted my chin. No, sweetheart. I am proud of you. The next afternoon, there was a soft knock at our apartment door. My mother opened it expecting a neighbor. Instead, Vincent Moretti stood quietly in the hallway holding a plain white bakery box tied with blue ribbon. There were no bodyguards crowded around him. No long line of black vehicles outside. Just one man dressed simply in a navy overcoat. Emma looked understandably surprised. Mr. Moretti? He inclined his head politely. I hope I am not interrupting. She invited him inside. Our apartment suddenly felt even smaller than usual, yet Vincent never acted uncomfortable. He noticed the worn furniture, the patched curtains, the family photographs taped carefully to the refrigerator. His attention lingered on a framed picture of me beside my father taken years before he passed away. Your daughter speaks very highly of you, he said softly. Emma smiled. She only sees my best days. Vincent placed the bakery box on the table. Inside sat a small strawberry shortcake from one of the finest bakeries in Manhattan. Written across the top in careful icing were 4 simple words. For the honest little girl. Emma looked at the cake before turning back toward him. The promotion at the bakery. Vincent remained silent. That was you, was not it? He answered honestly. I only created an opportunity. Your hard work earned everything else. Emma folded her hands together. I do not know how to thank you. Vincent glanced toward me as I carefully arranged the daisies into the old glass vase. You already have. She looked confused. Vincent smiled gently, the same quiet smile I had seen outside the restaurant. Your daughter returned something far more valuable than money. She reminded me that character still exists in this city. He paused before adding the words neither of us would ever forget. I did not save your family. Your daughter saved something. Inside me first. 1 year passed faster than I ever imagined possible. Some things changed so gradually that I barely noticed them until I looked back. Our apartment was still small, but laughter filled it more often than silence. My mother no longer skipped her medicine to make sure I had enough milk with breakfast. She still worked hard at the bakery, but now she came home with enough energy to help me with homework before we shared tea beside the window. Every Friday, I still sold flowers outside Bellucci's steakhouse, not because we had to anymore, but because I loved watching strangers smile when they carried a bouquet home to someone they cared about. Vincent Moretti visited from time to time, never with an announcement, never with unnecessary attention. Sometimes he bought flowers. Sometimes he simply stopped to ask how school was going or whether my mother was taking care of herself. I eventually stopped seeing him as the mysterious man everyone whispered about. To me, he became the person who always remembered my birthday and somehow knew exactly which books I wanted to read before I even mentioned them. One crisp autumn afternoon, he invited my mother and me to attend the opening of a new community learning center in Upper Manhattan. The building had once been abandoned, but now sunlight poured through restored windows onto shelves filled with books, colorful classrooms, and music drifting through wide hallways. Children laughed as they explored every corner. Parents stood nearby wiping away quiet tears of relief. A ribbon stretched across the entrance while reporters gathered with cameras, expecting another speech from one of the city's most successful businessmen. Vincent stepped to the microphone, but instead of talking about investments or buildings, he spoke about choices. A city does not become stronger because of the people who have the most, he said calmly. It becomes stronger because of the people who choose to do what is right when nobody expects them to. Then he looked directly toward me. Today we are announcing the Lily Parker Scholarship. Every year, it will support children whose honesty, kindness, and character shine brighter than their circumstances. My hands covered my mouth before I even realized I was crying. My mother reached for my shoulder, her own eyes filled with tears she no longer tried to hide. The audience applauded, but I barely heard them. I only saw Vincent smiling the same quiet smile he had worn on that rainy night outside the restaurant. After the ceremony ended, I wandered through the library until I found a small bronze plaque mounted near the entrance. It did not mention wealth. It did not mention success. It simply read, in honor of the belief that integrity is worth more than opportunity. I stood there for a long time before Vincent quietly joined me. Do you like it? He asked. I nodded, but I did not do anything special. He smiled gently. That is exactly why it matters. I looked up at him. Do you ever think about the envelope? He laughed softly. Almost every day. Why? He folded his hands behind his back as children raced past us carrying stacks of books. Because I believed money changed lives. He paused before looking at me with the same calm eyes that had watched me run through the rain a year earlier. Then an 8-year-old girl taught me that character changes people, and people change the world. As we stepped outside together, golden leaves drifted across the sidewalk where children laughed without worrying about tomorrow. I realized my mother had been right all along. Flowers really did remind people that tomorrow was worth waiting for. And sometimes the smallest act of honesty blooms into something so beautiful that its fragrance reaches hearts money could never touch.